The world is facing a global energy crisis.
Now, with oil prices hitting their highest levels since 2008, many are suffering what's been described as a cost of living crisis, with rising energy bills impacting households and businesses' bottom lines. This as the world continues to navigate a supply chain crisis post-pandemic and their transition to greener energies, all ahead of COP27 to be held in the Middle East.
I'm Hadley Gamble on assignment for CNBC from the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum from the World Government Summit 2022 here in Dubai, where international business leaders and ministers have been gathering to discuss the main challenges facing the world today.
As part of the conversations, I hosted a panel discussion around one of the biggest questions: will energy security derail the energy transition? Among the guests, U.S. Department of State's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Transformation, Anna Shpitsberg; Tim Holt, Executive Board Member and Labor Director at Siemens Energy; and Crescent Petroleum CEO, Majid Jafar.
Will energy security derail the energy transition? Again, there's been this sense that the two are somehow in opposition, and you're seeing that in the media today. Of course, they're not. There can be no energy transition without energy security and affordability. And the focus has been too much on supply. How do we starve supply? As if starving investment into oil and gas is going to solve climate change while demand keeps growing. Of course it's not. I mean, that's as ridiculous as trying to solve obesity by starving funding to sugar and wheat farmers. And not making any changes in diets or policies of how food is consumed. Climate change is fundamentally a consumption issue. So the wrong focus has been there throughout. Gas is a fundamental enabler of renewables because it backs it up, because it's intermittent, and it's the path to future technologies like hydrogen. And oil, even if we're having electric vehicles, they're made of oil. Solar panels are made of oil. Wind turbines are made of oil. Everything we've relied on during COVID, from masks to sanitizers, every single vaccine has had glycol as a stabilizing agent, another oil product. That message has not been understood, in particular in Western markets, the ongoing need for oil and gas. Now, how we produce it, we as Crescent, over 50 years, we've migrated now to 85% natural gas. We've brought down our emissions, flaring to practically zero. We've offset the rest to achieve and declare net zero last year, not in 2050. But even more importantly is the benefit of the product. So the gas we produce in the Middle East, by displacing liquid fuels like diesel for power generation, avoids more CO2 emissions annually than all the Teslas on the planet. And that fact is underappreciated, the important role of natural gas displacing coal in a lot of Western economies and in Asia, and in our region here in the Middle East, liquid fuels. So those facts really need to be better appreciated. We're having this schizophrenia in many Western governments. And I commend the UAE's policy, the strategy for 2050, because it's very, very clear. It's about 40% gas backing up 40% renewables, plus nuclear and other clean technologies. Energy has to be long-term, clear, strategic thinking, not flip-flopping with the latest technology trend or geopolitical event.
When you think about what happens next with regards to the transition, that's a fundamental question. Does this derail the transition in your mind?
I don't think it derails the transition. I think it accelerates the transition. And, we had talks also with the German Minister of Economy and Climate Action, and he clearly said, stronger focus on renewables, stronger focus on hydrogen. I think it's now, what's the alternative? Everybody's looking at how can we substitute the Russian gas, LNG, the regas is one, but the other one is push harder on the energy transition. I will caution a bit. It's always easy to set more aggressive targets. We need more renewables. The question is, how do we get it done? And I think that's a big question we all need to answer. Sometimes I hear we need the technology, we need the financing. My view on it is we have a lot of the ingredients, is just the implementation. And if you just look at implementation times, take the US offshore, we're talking about it until we see the first green kilowatt hour produced will be probably 2030. The huge build out on the offshore in Europe. It's great, it's up in the North Sea. How do we get it to the load centers? Transmission lines. We're building a big HVDC line from northern Germany to southern Germany where the load is. 3 years delay just due to permitting. I think there's a lot of inefficiency in the system. And if you really want to accelerate the energy transition, I think the focus should also be how do we take this inefficiencies out of the system.
Deputy Assistant Secretary, I want to get your sense of how far the Biden administration is willing to go to help out U.S. producers. And I'm talking about helping them get through red tape. Is the Keystone Pipeline back on the table at some point? If we're realistically talking about doing something to move forward, not lose speed, if you will, or steam towards the energy transition, but at the same point, make sure that people can afford to go about their daily lives. What's on the table that the Biden administration is doing now to help the U.S. oil and gas producers?
So from that standpoint, I don't know if you saw the U.S.-EU energy statement, joint statement on energy security, and there was a signal very much, and a component of the issues that the task force will put together that will work on is making sure that Europe can get supply within 2022, but then also giving some certainty to U.S. producers that will be amping up and surging supply into Europe over the long term and up to 2030. And of course, working together on the regulatory side, making sure that the environment for permitting is still there, which has been there. The process has been there to get permits online for LNG, and that continues. And we've committed to continue to make sure that that is a smooth and streamlined process, and that it's a streamlined process on getting infrastructure that needs to be there for Europe. At the same time, for us, when it comes to the transition and making sure we're not compromising it, because again, we cannot afford to compromise it. To the comments that were made that we cannot rely on one technology, just like we cannot rely too heavily on one supply route. It is the reason that we're putting so much money into hydrogen, which is such a game-changing technology that speaks to a variety of other sources, right? Because it can underpin nuclear, it can underpin gas, it can underpin renewables, it can clean a good portion of it, and so can CCUS. And so for us, it's making sure that the market has enough signals. It knows the regulatory environment will support the signals for current energy security, but we are sending also all the resources we can toward the transition. It's why we're putting billions of dollars into hydrogen R&D, and I have faith we'll get there. And I have faith because I was at Department of Energy when we had $1 a watt goal by 2020 for utility scale solar. We beat that by 3 years. We didn't even remotely have that level of momentum. So now looking at $1 per kilogram by 2030 for hydrogen, honestly, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic we can get the commercial technology there, and it's going to be the technology that will allow us to utilize other bases. But we have to focus on clean technology. We have to focus on building an efficiency into the system. It can't always be about putting new infrastructure. We talk about often energy access and how countries need sometimes to build new infrastructure. They also have a lot of underutilized infrastructure. And what we don't want is for them to add debt, to add additional gas infrastructure, oil infrastructure, coal infrastructure, when they're not even utilizing what they have. They're underlying issues. And we want to make sure that the path to decarbonization is a realistic path. It's one built in with efficiency. We are focused on emissions, reducing emissions everywhere, and creating technology in the US on the R&D side and bringing that cost down so that it benefits everywhere and everyone. And so that's how we're trying to balance those signals and the funding, which is a really big component of that.
No doubt about it. And also it's about messaging. And I'm talking about the demonization of the oil and gas sector. Now, it's hard to feel sorry for IOCs, but at the same point, demonizing them and playing politics is a part of the reason that we're in the mess that we're in today. What will the Biden administration commit to in terms of reaching across to these oil and gas producers? Because the ones I talk to say, we're not getting calls from the White House. We're hearing that we're getting calls, but we actually are not getting calls. And you've got to have them as part of the conversation if you want to get out of the mess.
There have been conversations with oil and gas companies and messaging, and let's be honest, it depends who you're listening to and when, of course. There are a lot of different messages out there, and I'm sure the forum will make a difference. But we will be honest, we have always come out and said oil and gas industry is critical to the transition. They are They are players in the energy system. They are key players. They are the ones that will be pushing abatement options. They're the ones that will be pushing hydrogen options. And to be quite honest, they're some of the ones that are putting significant investment into clean energy, including renewables. So it has always been, if we do not engage these participants, these critical stakeholders, we will not get to our stakeholder targets. We will not get to methane reduction goals. We will not get to efficiency goals. So the messaging has been, oil and gas companies have to be a part of the conversation, but we want them also to be a part of the conversation on the transition.